Welcome to the Wood Turning Workshop. Today, we're going to be turning Banksia pods. They come from down under in Australia, and believe me, they're some of the strangest things you'll ever put on your lathe. Stay tuned. When it comes to wood turning, Australia really stands out. They have some of the best wood turners in the world, some of the coolest wood you'll ever see. They also make some really nice products such as finishes, and I hear they even make a pretty good lathe. But by far, the most unusual turning item to come out of Australia is the Banksia pod. Believe it or not, this is what's left of the flower of the Banksia tree. These can get over 12 inches in length and over 3 pounds in weight. They're really hard and scaly now, but when they're growing, they're soft, beautiful flowers. And one of the most prominent features of the Banksia pod, obviously, are these holes. Well, that's where the seeds hide inside of the pod. And when these get hit by a grass fire, the seeds heat up, shoot out of the pod, and go up to 30 feet away from the tree. Now, I don't know who thought about putting a Banksia pod on the lathe first, but they're genius. You can make a lot of really beautiful items out of these things. Vases, coasters, and today, we're going to be making a paperweight. Who would ever believe something this beautiful could come out of something this ugly? Now, our paperweight involves a few steps. We obviously have to make a dome shape. Then we're going to hollow it out on the inside. We're going to turn an ebony ring for decoration to hide the seam of the plug that we're going to put in the bottom, because this is going to be filled with lead shot to give it some weight so it will hold papers down. Okay, before we get to turning the Banksia pod, I want to prepare the ebony for the decorative plug. I've got my chuck here, and I have an ebony cutoff, and I put a tenon on the end of it. Get that tightened in there. The hole I'm drilling in the bottom of the paperweight to hold the weights is 1 inch wide. So I want to take my calipers and get these set to 1.5 inches in width. And I'm going to take that diameter and transfer it to the end of the plug. I'm going to rest the calipers on the tool rest. That'll help me steady this through the process. I want to bring this point in contact with the wood, and when it scores a line, I want to match it up to this point, and that's the easiest way to get my diameter transferred. So make a mark. That's pretty close, but a little bit wide. Come in a little bit more. A little bit more. There we go. Okay, now pushing a little bit harder to make that mark nice and bold. With my parting tool, I'm now going to part this down to that diameter. Take it slow. There we go. Now, I want this to be 1/4 inch in height, which is 2 widths of the parting tool. So I'll just take one more full width cut. Now, one very important thing, I want to make sure that the sides of this plug are perfectly straight. If they're crooked, when we put it inside of the Banksia pod, we could have a nasty looking seam. But that looks pretty good now. So we're going to make a parting cut here. Come back half the width of the parting tool to make a release cut. Take your time, part it down. Use a real light touch, and you won't have to catch this thing, because if I make that wood thin enough there, all I have to do is turn the lathe off, and it snaps right off. Now we're going to put this aside, and we're going to start playing with the Banksia pod. But how are you going to hold this on the lathe? Well, we're going to have to go to the bandsaw and clean up the ends. Are you ready for some extreme turning? I know I am. We're going to take a 4-prong drive center. Get that started. We'll mount this between centers. Somebody once asked me to describe a Banksia pod, and the best description I could come up with, it's a pine cone on steroids. This thing is so unusual. That's what makes it extreme in my opinion. It has a very crusty outer layer. Kind of hurts a bit when you're roughing it out, but you get past that to a second layer, which is the complete opposite. It's a beautiful red velvet fuzz. And some people leave that on their turnings, and it's a really nice accent, very unusual. But we're interested in the third inside layer, and that is a hard woody substance, and it looks a lot like a fossil when you polish it up. Now I want to rough this out, and we'll use our roughing gouge for that, but make sure you wear a face shield, because those seeds that come out of the pod, some of them still might be in there, and they're about 1 inch long and very sharp, and when they come flying out, they hurt. Now, we'll take a roughing gouge, and since this is basically round, we can go from end to end safely. We'll just take a light first cut, come back, feed it in a little bit more. I think you can tell by looking at my hand and the tool handle, we're getting down into that red fuzz area. Let's take a closer look at it. Now you can see that red fuzz. It is really, really cool. Like I said, it makes a great accent, but on our paperweight, we're not going to use that today. We want to go for this nice look here. Now remember, with a roughing gouge, if it gets a little bit dull, just turn the tool, you expose a fresh edge, and you keep cutting. Saves all those extra trips to the grinder. I think we're there. Now, I need to hold this in my chuck, so I want to cut a tenon, and I'm going to use a Bedan tool that I've got angled to match the bevel on the inside of my chuck jaws. I'll just take a light cut. Now this end isn't as solid as I want it to be, so I'm going to go ahead and part this down. Come back. Now I'm going to cut the tenon. There we go. We have good solid wood now. I'm going to make nice contact with the jaws. Tighten this down. Get a nice, good, tight fit in there. Now I've gotten rid of my face shield because I'm pretty sure everything that was going to fly out has already flown out, so I don't have to worry about too many things coming at my face. I still need to clean up this end a little bit because since this is a curved pod, I have some punky wood here with some of that fuzz showing through. Now one thing to keep in mind, listen to this sound. Hear that vibration? That's because this sticks out so far that as I cut, it wants to vibrate. The closer in you get, the less vibration you'll have. Now, if you don't like the noise or you feel a little bit unsafe, bring your tailstock up and use the live center to go into the wood. It'll give you a little bit more support and it won't vibrate. The cuts I'm making right now are just to remove some waste wood, so I'm not that worried about the quality of the cut, and the noise doesn't bother me. Okay, one last cut. Now I'm leaving a small tenon here, and I'm making sure that this is perfectly flat. Because what we're preparing right now is this Banksia plug that goes in the bottom. I'm going to leave it a lot wider than that because we'll trim it down in a minute. And I want to make this, again, 1/4 inch wide, so it's going to be 2 widths of the parting tool. So there's 1, there's 2. Now I can start my cut right here. Now just like the ebony, just to leave a little bit of wood here. Stop the lathe. And twist right off. Now I'll set this aside. And since the parting tool doesn't always leave such a clean surface, I want to take my spindle gouge and we're going to clean up the bottom of the pod because I want the surface to be finished before our next step, which is to drill a hole. I'm dishing this out slightly too, because this is going to be the final bottom shape for the paperweight. Okay, now the last thing, I want to just dimple in right there, and that's going to help me drill a hole. I'm going to use a Jacob's chuck, which is basically a drill bit holder with a Morse taper on the end that fits in your tailstock. And I've already mounted a 1-inch Forstner bit. We'll put this in the tailstock, bring it up, lock it down. We're going to turn the lathe on and reduce the speed. We don't want to build up too much heat doing this. And then we'll use the tailstock to feed the bit in. That dimple we made with our spindle gouge helps center the bit. And since I want to go 1 inch deep, I've made a mark on the bit so I know when I'm deep enough. Now remember our ebony plug? I want to take the diameter of it and transfer it to my calipers, and then transfer it to the bottom of the Banksia pod. There we go. That's perfect. So what the heck are we doing? We're preparing the Banksia pod to receive the ebony plug to make the decorative ring. And we need a really nice tight jam fit so we don't have a seam. I want to do a plunge cut with the parting tool, and my plug is 1/4 inch tall, so I want to go about 3/16 of an inch in. And I'm carefully working my way over to the score mark, and I'm going to stop just short of it. I'm going to stop the lathe and test fit the plug, because I don't want to make this too wide or it'll ruin the seam. And as always, I can take more wood off, I can't put it back on. I'm just going to take a wisp of wood off here and see if this fits. Oh, perfect. Nice and snug. Now we've got that great fit with the plug, I want to glue it into place. And we're going to use some medium cyanoacrylate glue, and we're going to put that on the Banksia pod, and then we'll use accelerator on the ebony. Start with the glue. Get it on all the surfaces. That should be enough, I think. This is an absorbent wood, so it'll soak in a little bit. Take the accelerator, spray it on the ebony. This is where we start working quickly. Put this in place, push it in, bring the tailstock up, and use that pressure to seat it. Now one thing, do not get the accelerator and glue on your fingers at the same time. It heats it up. It'll actually burn you if that happens. Well, that's been about 5 minutes. Get the tailstock out of the way. And I'm going to get my spindle gouge and clean up the bottom of the Banksia pod before we start to shape it. Just get rid of all this waste here. Starts to vibrate, lighten your cut up. Ebony is a really cool wood to work with. Really shines up beautifully. Cuts nicely. And I want to carefully clean up the bottom all the way. And I want to make sure I dish this slightly inwards so the paperweight will sit on the outer edges. It looks good, but it doesn't look like a decorative ring yet. So we're going to go back to our parting tool, and we're going to make the ring. Now if you remember, the hole we drilled is 1 inch wide. So we're going to start parting in a little bit shy of that mark. There we go. So now we've got the start of a ring. And don't worry about that. We're just trying to get it out of the way. I want to make the ring about 1/8 of an inch wide. And I'm also going in and making another shoulder because that's going to accept the Banksia pod plug that we parted off earlier. That looks good. Now, the next step, we need to start shaping the paperweight. Now, one important thing, I want to leave a pleasing amount of Banksia pod next to the decorative band of ebony. So I don't want to curve this and start cutting into the ebony. I want to be very careful about that. It's looking pretty good. Get a little bit closer. I like that. Start the spindle gouge flat, roll it as it cuts, come back, roll it as it cuts. Just a nice smooth movement. Come back and remove a little bit of wood on this side. More often than not, when somebody gets a catch with a spindle gouge, it's this last movement right here that they don't do properly. If I come in and keep the tool flat like this on the cut, that leading edge will hit the wood and snap down and catch. If you come this way and roll the tool, that leading edge then won't hit that wood and get the catch. So when I come back this way, I'm almost done, I roll it. And also part of that rolling motion, you're lifting the handle like that. So by lifting the handle, it helps you direct that in and keep these wings clear of the wood. I want to leave a tenon on here, about 3/4 of an inch, ½ inch, because while the pod is on here, I want to go ahead and sand it because I'm going to have better access to the bottom. Now I've sanded all the way down to 400 grit. But one really cool thing about Banksia is it takes a very high polish. So I'm going to take this down to 4,000 grit. So take a look and remember what this looks like. This is 400. Now this is 4,000. Now it's time to pay a trip to the dentist. We're going to need a dental pick. Now you can get these from your dentist because they throw them away after a while, or you can pick them up at your hardware store. And why do we need a dental pick? Because these little holes have a bunch of junk in them. It could still have a little bit of the shell left in there from the seed that came out, or in some cases you'll even find spider webs because a lot of little critters like to live in these things while they're on the ground. It's a bit tedious, but it's well worth the effort. There's one of those seeds. Told you they were sharp. I made a quick trip to the bandsaw and cut off most of the excess wood of the pod, and I mounted a new set of jaws in here, little tiny ones, and we're going to expand them into the hole on the Banksia pod. Now gently expand the jaws out. You don't want to put too much pressure on it or it could split the pod. Now we'll take our spindle gouge and clean up the end. And we'll just take nice light cuts, work away the excess. And we'll sand this also to 4,000 grit. Then we'll be on to our next step. Now for the last bit of turning that we're going to do on the lathe, and that's to prepare this plug to go into the bottom of the Banksia paperweight. We're going to take a faceplate. Everybody should have one. They come with their lathes. And we've attached a waste piece of wood to it. And we're going to make a glue block with this. And what we have to do is take our calipers and take the diameter of that nub I left on earlier and transfer that to the face of the glue block. Now with my little parting tool again, follow this out. And what I'm creating is a method of centering the Banksia blank. And it also gives me a little bit more secure hold when I glue it on there. See if that fits. Oh, nice. Now, it's just like we did earlier with the ebony blank. We're going to glue this in there. And this time I can put the cyanoacrylate glue on the plug because it's easier to handle and I don't have the risk of getting it on any of the glue on my fingers. So I get a good layer on there, take the accelerator, spray it on the blank. Now we're going to work quickly. Put this in place, bring the tailstock up, lock it in, advance the quill, let that sit for about 5 minutes. Well, I think that's dry. Let's pull this back. Looks good. Next thing, I want to take the inside diameter of the ebony ring and transfer that to my Banksia plug and part down to that mark. Ease in. See how that fits. A little bit wide. That's good. I don't want to rush. I'm also tapering this out a little bit towards the tailstock. That way I know the very tip is the narrowest part, and if I mess up, I haven't lost that much wood. Almost there. Very nice. Now I need to reduce the rest of the plug down to that diameter, but don't cut into the glue block or your piece of Banksia could come flying free. And again, make sure these walls are perfectly straight so you'll have a beautiful seam on the bottom of the paperweight. And it doesn't hurt to stop and check the fit while you're doing the rest of the plug here. See, I need to take a little bit more off. Too tight of a fit would be a problem. Actually, that's perfect. Cool. Now we want to part that off, and this is the time when you can start cutting into the glue block. Want to remove some more of that. And that little tenon I put on the end of the Banksia pod right here is what's holding it into the glue block now. So we'll just part this off. Now it's time to add a little bit of weight to the paperweight. But before you do that, take your plug and try to get it to match into the pattern of the pod the best you can. And then remember that position, because you're going to start working quickly here. There are lots of things you can use for weight. I have some lead split shot sinkers for fishing here, or in this case I'm actually going to use some BBs. You want to pour them in to where they're just up to that shelf. You don't want them proud of it because then your plug won't fit. This is where we have to work quickly. Balance out there, get some of the glue and run a little bead of it around. Okay. We're going to take our accelerator, spray it on the plug. Be very careful about lining it up the way I wanted it. Take a mallet, Tap that home and let it dry. Well, now a little bit more sanding. I mounted a Jacob's chuck with a soft sanding pad in the headstock, and I'm using flap discs to even out the bottom and get rid of this excess wood we have. I'm using a 60 grit pad to start with because that'll quickly remove this wood. Then I'm going to work my way all the way up to an 800 grit for a beautiful finish. That looks great. Now, after a couple of coats of hand-rubbed polyurethane, our paperweight will look every bit as nice as this one. So I hope you enjoyed this episode on extreme turning, and if you happen to get your hands on a Banksia pod, play around. There are a lot of different items you can make out of it. So until the next time on the Wood Turning Workshop, keep turning.